Shalom. So, as most of you should already know, Father Stephen DeYoung, who I jokingly referred to as Senpai, noticed me. So, I might as well play this clip if I can find it. Where did I put the clip? Let me find the clip and play it. This clip, one of the first clips I ever made. I am going to try to include sound. Okay. Ta-da! It was the only good picture I could find of him in regalia. I'm glad he saw it. He never responded to the thing, but so I called this clip "Senpai Notices Me." Here, let us play it from the beginning.
So I also have to ask on behalf of my friend Jacob, who's one of the Jewish followers of Paul Vanderklay.
Yes. I've actually lurked sometimes live on his response videos to me. I don't know if that'll please him or freak him out.
Both, maybe. Yeah. So you know who I'm talking about. So I also have to ask on behalf of my friend Jacob, who's one of the Jewish followers of.
So the picture, I just looked in Google Images. It's from his ordination. I didn't realize from his diaconate ordination, but I guess that makes sense. And it's on Saint Tikhon, Saint Tikhon's thing. And I mean, because he agreed to come on, I bought his book, Faith of the Apostles, and I am 20% through, and I am having this chatting stream. People are welcome to join, partially because I honestly, I don't know how I'm going to respond to this. The book is very disappointing. So generally, when I see ortho bros, and I'm not calling Father Stephen an ortho bro, saying silly things about Judaism, my response is, hey, you should go listen to Father Stephen DeYoung. And I mean, there's this chart I pulled out of his book. Actually, let me see if I can. I'm not sure if this will let me share. My Kindle. Okay. So this is his book, and I started making notes. next to women. Not sure what that means. I don't know that. Whole counsel. No, his 3 books are Whole Counsel of God. God is a Man of War, and this one. And I started highlighting things. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem required a near complete reconstruction of religious practice for Jewish communities that did not embrace the Christian gospel. This is just plain wrong, and it is the typical mistake that Christians make all the time. The destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem required a nearly complete reconstruction of religious practice for Jewish communities. And that's the birth of Rabbinic Judaism. Let me see where's that chart, that horrendous chart he had in here. This is the chart. Oh, okay. So, I mean, I'm not going to fight with most of these dates. Circa AD 500, formation of Rabbinic Judaism. He's off by 1,000 years, and it's not clear which way he's off by 1,000 years, but he's off by 1,000 years. Because, I mean, if you understand what happened, there was Judaism, pre-exilic Judaism, which we can debate what that was. Then there was the Babylonian captivity, and that is, at least when most of the books of the prophets claim to have been written. And then Cyrus allows the Jews back to build a temple, and that is the time of Ezra, and at least religious people will claim Daniel, right? And that's when things like synagogues started. And there's a really simple proof of that for Christians. The Gospels talk about Jesus as a rabbi. The Gospels talk about Jesus going to synagogue. The Gospels describe Jesus reading the Haftarah in synagogue, right? The Gospel, and I believe Paul in his own letters talks about going to synagogues, and we have, dug up synagogues all over the world. So from before the destruction of the temple, of the second temple in the year 70. So I mean, this is, what do you mean by Rabbinic Judaism, right? If you mean synagogue services that were not centered, focused around temple worship, well, that is what was developed by the prophets. And I mean, if you want to date that a very late date, some people would say 2nd or 3rd centuries before the Christian era, right? But you can't date the invention of Rabbinic Judaism as in Pharisaic Judaism, as in having scribes, having the Talmudic method, not the. So when we say Talmud, right, we're talking about. Usually, we're talking about the Babylonian Talmud, and the Babylonian Talmud was finalized around the time, and that's what he's claiming is the formation of rabbinic Judaism is when the Talmud was finalized. And that's just a random date to pick as your formation of rabbinic Judaism. It's totally random. So that's the thing. So Sir Dabsalot asks a very good question, which is, when was the Babylonian Talmud first written? And first written is a difficult thing to say. The Babylonian Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah. It is a record of a debate of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was redacted around the year 200. So, I mean, you could make a much stronger argument for the year 200 and talk about like modern Judaism being codified into the redaction of the Mishnah by Rabbi Judah the Prince. But for a Christian, that causes all kinds of problems, because I think I am not aware of serious Christians who deny, for example, the first, let's say, 2 to 4 chapters of the Mishnah of at least being in the waters that Jesus swam in, right? The discussions that Jesus was having, and now with the Dead Sea Scrolls, I have to say, MMT, Mikatzat Maseh Torah, or sometimes called the 2 letters regarding the Torah, or it's one of the reconstructed letters that was part of the sectarian texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And yes, I'm umming a lot. I am not aware that anybody. No, I am aware that some people date. I don't know if that particular scroll, but some of the Dead Sea Scrolls as late as 200. But these are the same people who date Christianity that late, right? Generally, the accepted dates of MMT and similar things like the Damascus Scrolls would be 100 years before the Christian era. Yeah, the 500 year, I think you could make a much better case for 1500 than you could for 500. So, I mean, I hear him say a lot of things that can be ambiguous. And so when I was first referred to Lord of Spirits podcast, I said, and I still say, it is sorry, my connection isn't great. Maybe I can close some windows and that will help. I'm just trying to close some things and maybe that will reduce the strain on my connection. Okay. So I think you could make a much better argument for 1500 than you could for 500. And so when I first heard of Lord of Spirits, what I said, and what I continue to say, is I was impressed by how little it misrepresents Judaism. And I realize that seems like faint praise, but it really isn't, because Father Stephen seems like a very serious person who's trying very hard to understand the scholarship, read 1500 CE. So what I've been saying is his date is off by 1,000. I don't know which way. So his 500 500 CE, right, of the Christian era is off by 1,000 years. Either, I mean, you can make a better argument for 1,000 or 1,500 CE than you can for 500, honestly, because it's like, how are you defining rabbinic Judaism? There was a period of near silence between 500 and 1,000, which is referred to as the period of the Gaonim, in which Judaism was pretty stagnant between the year 500 and 1,000. And that's really what you might call the codification of the Talmud. I don't know that there was ever an actual codification of the Talmud, but I think that's during that period, it became a standard text, and that's the right. And I'm just wondering how, like, I'm having this stream partially to collect my thoughts, and I wasn't sure if I'm going to try to finish the book by Friday, but yeah, I'm just trying to collect my thoughts. I'm definitely, like, this chart is honestly, it's the type of thing that I might have actually seen this exact chart on Twitter and told the person, like, you need to check out Father Stephen DeYoung, because so when I hear Father Stephen speak, he's never said anything this blatantly bad and clearly wrong. I mean, we can go through my other notes because he wraps up his argument comprehensively there. Okay. I mean, we can go through the rest of my notes. In fact, the Trinitarian doctrine and the entire concept of sainthood were wrongly assumed to be a later concession to pagan polytheism. And I wrote doubly wrong. And yeah, it's just, I was expecting his book to be much more scholarly. I was expecting footnotes to his footnotes are just like general hand wavy footnotes. They're not exactly, you know, if he's citing he cites verses, he doesn't cite like exact things. And so Trinitarian doctrine and the entire concept of sainthood were wrong, and to combine these two, I mean, there's just so much wrong there, and like just separating these two, I mean, putting these two things together like that, I think it's mistaken. The publication house wouldn't sell it if it was super scholarly, so he had to condense it for a lay audience. He references the papers in the back. Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah, it's just I myself have been trying to write something like this, and I've been putting the scholarly stuff in the footnotes, but his footnotes, they're not that detailed. They just aren't. They're certainly not to the level of detail that even I was putting, and I thought I was bringing it down to a much less, you know, I wasn't doing individual pages. Judaism is more properly used to refer to rabbinic Judaism, which emerged several centuries after the dawn of Christianity. Like, yeah. I mean, it's like, eek. Rabbinic Judaism is a product of the Talmud. He makes it sound like Judaism had the infrastructure that Christianity did, right? He's imposing Christian structures onto Judaism, right? Because what Christianity had was, it had a system of bishops and councils, and these councils were actually, you know, held by the emperor, and decisions were made and disseminated. And that's the opposite of how Judaism has been formed, and that actually becomes more clear when he starts talking about Yigdal. Judaism was heavily dispersed, right? And what happened was, there were academies, there were rabbis who became luminaries, but their influence was not imposed from above, and therefore we never had councils, right? So, for example, Maimonides, who's in the first real codifier of Judaism, and he mentions, it's funny. So this is this where he gets to Yigdal? Okay, so One feature of the Orthodox Jewish synagogue service is the hymn sung near its dismissal that repeatedly affirms God does not have a body. He's referring to Yigdal. This particular hymn was added in the 4th or 5th century as a directed response to and rejection of Christianity. He's off by 1,000 years. Hello, Jean-Paul. Yigdal was, and I looked it up, it was written in 1402. And it's not actually part of the it's not actually part of the liturgy. It's just a popular hymn that people have started to recite, and it's based on Maimonides, and it's not even based on things that Maimonides wrote himself, really. So Maimonides, when he was 23, wrote a commentary on the Mishnah, and based on that commentary on the Mishnah, I don't think he formulated the 13 principles himself. I'm not sure who actually formulated the 13 principles. They are based on Maimonides. Let me look that up. 13 principles of faith. So this is from Wikipedia. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, better known as Maimonides or the Rambam, lived at a time when both Christianity and Islam were developing active theologies. Jewish scholars were often asked to attest to their faith by their counterparts in other religions. The Rambam's 13 principles of faith were formulated in his commentary on the Mishnah. They were one of several efforts by Jewish theologians in the Middle Ages to create such a list. By the time of Maimonides, centers of Jewish learning and law were dispersed geographically. Judaism no longer had a central authority that might bestow official approval on his principles of faith. Maimonides' 13 principles were controversial when first proposed, evoking criticism by Crescas and Joseph Albo. They evoked criticism as minimizing acceptance of the entire Torah. The 13 principles were ignored by much of the Jewish community for the next few centuries. Over time, 2 poetic restatements of these principles, Ani Ma'amin and Yigdal, were canonized in the Jewish prayer book. Eventually, Maimonides' 13 principles of faith became the most widely accepted statement of faith. So, like, he's trying to understand Yigdal in a similar manner as the Nicene Creed. And first of all, it's from hundreds of years after the Nicene Creed, if not thousands. Yigdal is from 1402. And it has its authority because it gained it by people accepting it and reciting. I mean, Yigdal now is just so widely known and recited that many people know it by heart, and so it has become a de facto creed. But to date the Yigdal to the 4th or 5th century, I mean, he's off by 1,000 years. And how is he making that mistake? Because he's seeing it as some Jewish version of the Nicene Creed, and that's just, I mean, it's just wrong. Let's go back to the other things I highlighted. Judaism is more properly used to refer to rabbinic Judaism, a product of the Talmud. Judaism isn't a product of the Talmud. Well, okay, you could say Judaism is a product of the Talmud, but then you wouldn't be able to date it to the time of the Talmud. I mean, there are people who will argue that Judaism is based in, and that's why they'll talk about Talmudic Judaism, but that is more properly, I mean, honestly, it's more properly dated to the 1500s than it is to the 500s. By contrast, Rabbinic Judaism was more accurately understood to originate later in the 5th and 6th centuries, largely in reaction to Christianity and within Jewish communities that had rejected Jesus of Nazareth as the Messiah. I mean, what does he do with Romans 10 and 11? This story of a Christianity that is a continuation of the Judaism that existed during the time of Jesus. I mean, this is, first of all, it's hardcore supersessionism. And yes, many people would say that that's anti-Semitic. I am not calling Father Stephen anti-Semitic. But like Paul in Romans quite clearly says that the Jews, and then John, the Gospel of John, right? You have the Christian community. And if you're dating the Gospel of John to 90, right, then they're the ones who are defining this Jew that is the other, right? The Jews of John, right? And so to say that Judaism is originated after the Gospel of John, I mean, how like, then who are these Jews that John is talking about, right? And so when people talk about the blessing of the heretics, right, which was added as a 19th benediction into the Shmones, right, the 18 benedictions, right? The 18 benedictions obviously existed before Christianity, and the 19th benediction was added in response to Christianity, right? So, and it's still, we still refer to it as the 18 benedictions. And Christianity abandoned, like, there is no Amidah, there is no, and that's, I think the next one, nowhere in St. Paul's description of his new role does he invalidate the Torah and its commandments. I mean, this is Paul within Judaism. I I prefer it to the normal Christian understanding, but I mean, first of all, he's arguing against all of Christianity because the question becomes, okay, let's say I do now accept um, Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Does that mean that I should no longer circumcise my children? This is a question I ask of Michael a lot. He his his wife is Jewish, so should his son be circumcised? Um, the mystical element of first century Judaism would later be pruned from the rabbinic Jewish tradition, surviving only within Christianity. This is just plain false. I mean, Jewish mysticism, this is the funny part. Like Christians and yes, Eastern Orthodoxy, I guess, retained some forms of the mysticism, but it was generally Christianity. And so, like, Jewish mysticism during the first century was limited to those who were to the initiated. And I know there's this version of Eastern Orthodoxy which still has this idea, but this is pretty fringe within Christianity, which charged Judaism with Kabbalism. I still hear that term, Kabbalism, right? And no, we most certainly did not prune the Merkava tradition out of Judaism, and like Christians were, well, see Luther's book Shem HaMaforash, where he like goes to town against Jews, and the Shema, a daily prayer, roughly based on Deuteronomy 6:4. So where did the Shema go? I mean, and frankly, I want to ask him: is Justinian's Code the Orthodox wiki says that Justinian's Code made it illegal for Jews to recite the Shema? Why don't Christians recite the Shema twice daily as the synagogues did during the time of Jesus? Where did the Shemona Esrei, the 18 benedictions, go? Where did the reciting of Moses, the Jesus prayer is the Shema? I'm sorry, but I think, and this goes back to his appearance on Gospel Simplicity. If I think Jesus himself, so Gospel Simplicity asked him, would a second temple Jew who walked into a modern Orthodox synagogue or into an Eastern Orthodox church, would he be more comfortable? And Father Stephen's answer was, well, he would see a lot of things that would remind him of things from the temple and the synagogue in an Eastern Orthodox church. I think a Second Temple Jew, including Jesus, if he were to walk into a Christian, into any church, but especially an Eastern Orthodox church, would run out of there screaming, because he would understand it to be at some sort of temple to a foreign god, not resembling and having the components of the synagogue service that Jesus and the early Christians and the Christians in Jerusalem who read Moses on a weekly basis, see Acts 15, were used to. And the recitation of the Shema and having tzitzit and having tefillin. And so these things existed during the Second Temple period. These are things that Judaism just maintained the synagogue services that Jesus was used to. And yes, over the past 2,000 years, there have been certainly a lot of, you cannot expect it to be exactly the same. And no honest person would expect it to be exactly the same. But it's recognizable. The parts of it are recognizable. The services have the same components, and the Eastern Orthodox service has all of the components of an idolatrous temple, including, the icons, the veneration of the icons. So Judaism has I think gone too far in removing all artwork from our synagogues in reaction to Christianity. But that's because what is certainly not acceptable is the worship of icons. So, when you talk about the temple having all sorts of artwork in it, yes, it did. But never was it the object of worship. And so, yeah, becoming the children of Abraham, this is a complete misunderstanding based on Paul, honestly. To say, Abraham is the father of all nations in Judaism. And this goes into Paul's theology. This is a tangential point, but Second Temple literature is filled with identification of this figure and how he came to be. And this is the point regarding hypostasis that Sam made regarding Father Stephen's. We don't worship icons. We offer no sacrifices to icons. This is the thing. I have to say, the understanding, right? The understanding. Like when I found out that the Eastern Orthodox do not make icons of the Father, right? I was very, very happy about that. That's beautiful. And when Bo Branson talks about the monarchical Trinity, that is arguably within Judaism something that is permitted to Gentiles. But this sort of supersessionism where Christians retained the synagogue service, they very directly did not. The church fathers say this quite clearly. Melito, many Christians, and I would say the Didache, very directly and forcefully and intentionally rejected Jewish practice. And to now claim that, no, it's the other way around, this is just plain historically wrong. I'm glad Christians are trying to go back to the synagogue service. I would be very glad to hear Christians reciting the Shema, and I actually do know some Christians who recite the Shema. But I have to say that Christians who recite the Shema twice a day are far more likely to end up becoming Unitarians. And I mean, certainly there are no Christians wearing crispidin, tzitzit, or phylacteries, and you know these are a continuous tradition. Mezuzot, all of these things, Christianity deliberately abandoned these things, and now he's claiming that it's the other way around, and this is just historically not true. Yeah, I mean, Yigdal is from 1402, and his understanding of Jewish history is very, very backwards. Elohim, generally translated as God when used to indicate the Tetragrammaton, often takes plural verbs because it is grammatically plural. The only places it takes plural verbs is when it is not referring to God. I am not aware of a single place in the entirety of the Torah, of Tanakh, where the word Elohim is referring to God himself and uses plural verbs. If such a thing exists, it's news to me. And I mean, I have to say, there are people who will say that's because the Masoretes doctored the text. But the fact is that the Dead Sea Scrolls and other findings show that that's not the case, that the Masoretes did not. This apparent contradiction was not lost on those who read these texts in the centuries preceding Christ. And this is the funny thing. These apparent, very obvious contradictions were not lost on those who were reading the text. And so this tension between the ineffable God and the hypostases of God, right? Right. So it says, "Let us make," right? We actually discussed this exact verse in the Bible study yesterday. It says, "Let us take," "Let us make," and then the very next verse is God created, and it's in the singular. This is actually you might want to go see the end of the Bible study from yesterday where we discussed this. I'm not going to go over it again, but this tension between the ineffable God and the hypostases of God is a necessary tension that Judaism retained, and Christianity focuses on the hypostases, and Islam focuses on the ineffable nature of God. And I actually this is part of my whole thing is why do we need both Christianity and Islam? Because it is precisely these two wings that God uses to spread Jewish ideas, that in the tension between them, you see the truth of Judaism. And so, the tension between the ineffable nature of God and the hypostases of God's revelation in the world was the Jews. This was, in fact, a important and right line, left high fraud width. This is your first time here. Middle line, yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's a kind of like, so there's Christianity, there's Islam, and it's actually Judaism, which truly shows the right path among it. And so, yes, God is ineffable, yet God reveals himself in the world. And in the Hebrew, like, this tension is a central tension of theology. It's very obvious. It's not lost at all in the Hebrew itself. And you can see Joseph was on Paul Vanderklay's. This is actually one of the clips I have. Let me pull up that clip. Okay, let me. So this is the clip. And this is when Yosef was on Paul Vanderklay's channel and speaking about God 1 and God 2.
You have people in Bridges of Meaning who say you shouldn't even be dealing with any of this because it's all one God. It's confusing otherwise. God has, like, look at what, Luke, certainly has said this to you, I think, a couple of times, or has commented about this, that, like, are we just wasting our time here? And I don't think we are. I don't think that this is, but I don't know that this language is a good use of time because it's more confusing than it might be worth.
Okay, what you got, Teresa?
Well, so I don't know. I mean, I have Hashem and Elohim, but, like, and
well, that'll translate broadly in the Christian world.
Exactly. No, but I'm saying I have that, but no, I can think about that, but I also think it's really interesting.
And I think you're I like that. I like what you just laid out, because I think Elohim and Hashem, even though you're using a substitution, but so Elohim and the Tetragrammaton will say that.
Yep.
And so that tension is a real tension within and necessary tension within Jewish theology and the Hebrew scriptures. And so Christianity fell off on the wrong side, the idolatrous side of the hypostases. And that's, in fact, the mistake that he's making. Whereas Islam, in a very real sense, fell off on the ineffable nature of God. And the fact is that God does reveal himself into the world. Yeah. Okay, I mean, if somebody wants to join and we can discuss this, I started this stream because I wanted to kind of chew on how I am going to discuss these things with Father Stephen. I might, well, you can also send it to him. I don't know if he'll have time for me to. So Judaism needs what you believe to be heresy for it to maintain, or more steel-manned wording, to pronounce orthodoxy. Judaism, no. So Judaism needs for people to recognize this tension between the hypostases of God. Right. Judaism needs a tension between the ineffable nature of God, and the scriptures describe this tension between, just like Father Stephen says, this apparent contradiction was not lost on those who read these texts in the centuries preceding Christ. The tension, this contradiction, right, is actually very clearly pronounced in the Hebrew text. That God is ineffable, right? No man can see God and live, yet people see God and live, right? And this is a constant theme in the Hebrew scriptures. And to fall on the side that Father Stephen does, of only talking about these three hypostases, right, is to misunderstand what the Hebrew text does with this tension, which is say, yes, for example, the judges. Could you compare and contrast hypostases and sephirot? To some extent, the concept of the sephirot is I mean, you could say they are hypostases, and there are Christians who make this argument, right? We would call the sephirot garments, and just as a garment both reveals something about you while concealing something about you, in a very similar manner, we would say the sephirot hide God while revealing him. And to the point, when the Bible, for example, refers to people as gods, or judges as gods, or leaders as gods, right? It is in fact teaching us something about this hypostatic nature of God. And this is Genesis 1, right? God created man in his image. This is, after all, the background of my thing. God created man in his image. And in a very real sense, we are all hypostases of God when we are, in fact, doing that which God commands us to do, and embodying God's will in the world. And so making the mistake, thank you. I like it too. And what it reminds me of is partially the twin commandments, Va'avta et Hashem Elokecha and Va'avta l'recha kamocha. You shall love the Lord your God, and you shall love your fellow as yourself. And those are twin commandments, right? Because of this very same thing, this basic Jewish teaching, right? And to lose that, which Christianity has, into this idea of Jesus being monogenes, and to lose the hypostatic nature of all of humanity is in fact one of the ways I think Christians deny Jesus both his divinity and his humanity. Yeah, we've discussed this a lot. Okay, if there are more things to talk about, or if somebody wants to come on, we can do that. Otherwise, I am going to end this broadcast and go back and try to read more of his book. But like I said, this was an attempt for me to try to try to formulate my thinking and response to his book. Christianity teaches us to see Christ in every person. That is why Christians venerate each other with kisses, etc. To some extent, but I have to say, the idea of the virgin birth and Jesus as being uniquely the Son of God, monogenes, in a very real sense, is a denial of, just the idea that Jesus needed to be born of a virgin to be called the Son of God is a denial of, I believe, Jesus's whole teaching of a very Jewish idea, which is that we are all made in the image of God. And so elevating him to the child of a virgin itself is a denial of his humanity. Okay, people, I'm going to end the stream and go and try to have read more of the book. Shalom.